7 years. 7 years of exile. 7 years pretending I could outrun what I was and outrun him. I thought I had learned to control everything. My breath, my scent, my own traitorous omega biology that always flared at the worst possible moment. For years, I convinced myself that silence was protection, that distance was armor, that if I hid deep enough, the alpha hunting me would eventually give up. But I was wrong. So dangerously wrong. My world started to crack minutes before he appeared. First came the heat sliding up my spine, that same forbidden heat I hadn't felt since the night I ran. Then the air thickened, heavy, almost unbreathable, like the forest itself was holding its breath with me. That's when I knew he was close, too close. My heart slammed so hard it felt like it might tear out of my chest. I tried to run. I tried to fight the instinct, but my body recognized him before my mind did. The ground seemed to vibrate right before I felt his breath, hot and deliberate, ghost against my neck. His voice slid down my skin like a promise or a sentence. You thought I'd never catch your scent, little Omega. In that moment, everything ended. My hiding place, my peace, my lie, because he had found me, and I knew there was no running left. I was navigating the chaotic rush of the Union Station concourse, a churning sea of hurried commuters that usually served as my preferred camouflage. The scent suppressants, administered every 4 hours without fail for the last 7 years, were supposed to be my impenetrable, invisible shield. I was focused on the ticket machine, calculating the fastest route away from the Crimson Heights Apartments district, a location I'd already overstayed by 3 critical weeks. My heart hammered a steady, anxious rhythm against my ribs, a familiar soundtrack to my perpetual vigilance. The air didn't just change, it compressed. It felt like walking into a wall of liquid heat and ozone, instantly burning away the delicate chemical barrier I had so meticulously maintained. My knees locked, every nerve ending dulled by years of strategic suppression, screamed a single terrifying truth. Alpha. Not just an alpha, but the alpha. The specific, unmistakable signature of dominance I had tracked and evaded for nearly a decade. A massive shadow fell over me. I didn't need to turn, didn't need to see the breadth of his shoulders, or the cold intensity of those infamous gray eyes to know that my lifetime of strategic evasion had just culminated in this devastating second. I was Madison Hayes, at 29 years old, with my slender build trembling beneath layers of muted, practical clothing, and I had just lost my war for independence. He moved with the predatory grace of something utterly unbound by human law, pressing in so close that the low, dangerous rumble of his voice vibrated directly against the fragile shell of my ear. His scent, cedar, cold stone, and pure, unrestrained dominance, was a physical force, effortlessly slicing through the faint, earthy cover of my suppressants. It flooded my senses, erasing the neutral smell of the transit hub and replacing it with the scorching realization of my biological designation. You thought I wouldn't catch your scent, little Omega. The words were a dark velvet accusation, a declaration of ownership that ripped through the carefully constructed control I had spent the last 7 years perfecting. I swallowed, trying desperately to recall the calming techniques that usually kept the volatile Omega pheromones locked down. They failed instantly. A frantic, terrifying flush of heat rose in my blood, a biological distress signal I hadn't felt since I initiated my self-imposed exile. I don't know what you are talking about, I managed, the lie tasting like ash. My gaze was fixed on a smudge mark on the polished floor, refusing to meet the possessive scrutiny I knew was washing over me. Internally, my anxiety spiked, making my usually sharp mind cloud with panic. Lying doesn't suit you, Madison. His voice deepened, the amusement in it chilling. He leaned lower, forcing me to tilt my head back, finally trapping me beneath the intense, scrutinizing gaze of Elias Thorne, the 34-year-old alpha, whose powerfully built physique radiated pure, calculating control. 7 years, Madison. 7 years of chasing shadows and sterile hiding places. Did you truly believe a vial of chemicals could defeat biology? He didn't touch me, not yet. But the air was so thick with his command that I felt physically immobilized. The crowd continued to churn around us, oblivious to the primal drama unfolding in their midst. This was the crushing realization. My fortress of quiet anonymity, built on relentless effort and perpetual anxiety, was nothing more than sandcastles against the tide of his undeniable will. He casually reached out, not toward me, but toward the collar of my practical, high-necked coat. He grasped the edge of the fabric, and gently, mockingly, pulled it wide enough to expose the small, almost invisible translucent patch adhered just below my clavicle. Scent suppressants. My lifeline, now exposed as a futile joke. Pathetic, he murmured, the word laced with disappointment, not anger, which was infinitely worse. You wasted so many good years running when you could have been right here. Before I could even formulate a proper protest, his hand clamped lightly, non-aggressively, around my upper arm. Lightly, but definitively. It was a possessive gesture, a public claim that warned every alpha scenting the air that this prize was taken. The control he exerted was absolute. He steered me away from the ticket machine, away from the concourse exit, toward a side service elevator, a discreet egress meant for high-profile personnel. My protest died in my throat, choked by the sheer, terrifying inevitability of the moment. My autonomy was already dissolving into the charged air of the transit hub. The world blurred into a fast, silent, expensive ride. The transition from the crowded, anonymous train hub to the sprawling, silent isolation of the Thorn estate was jarring. I wasn't returned to a common prison. I was delivered to a gilded cage carved out of wealth and security. The estate was vast, set back far from any city center. A monument to security and unapologetic luxury. The architecture spoke of enduring power, all dark wood, soaring glass, and manicured wilderness visible through floor-to-ceiling windows. This isolation was designed not just to keep others out, but to ensure that nothing claimed could ever leave. Elias had deposited me in a room that was larger than my entire unit back at Crimson Heights Apartments. It smelled of him, faintly, but irrevocably, an undercurrent of his powerful musk woven into the rich fabrics and polished stone. He had stripped me of my coat and my travel bag, tossing them carelessly onto a velvet chaise lounge. The scent patch was gone. I assumed he'd removed it during the silent, furious drive, a final, physical severing of my ties to my years of independent life. I stood rigid in the center of the massive bedroom, feeling smaller and more exposed than I ever had in my life. The air was heavy, unsuppressed, amplifying the low, anxious thrum of my Omega biology, a constant physical reminder of the destiny I had fought so hard to reject. He watched me from the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed over his powerfully built chest. His scrutinizing gray eyes missed nothing, the constant flicker of my gaze searching for an escape route, the involuntary tremble in my hands. "You look like a cornered animal, Madison," he observed, pushing off the door frame and walking slowly toward me. Each step was a measured beat of pure, unrelenting dominance. "I am a cornered animal," I retaliated, finding a thin thread of defiance. "What do you want, Elias? You've had 7 years to forget about the existence of one rogue Omega." He stopped barely a foot away. The heat emanating from him was palpable, intoxicating in a way that screamed danger and biological imperative simultaneously. "Forget?" He gave a short, hard laugh, devoid of humor. "Every negotiation, every acquisition, every moment of every day, I was aware of the space you left empty. That space was supposed to be mine, Madison. You simply prolonged the inevitable." He reached out, and this time, he touched. His large, warm hand cupped the back of my neck, the pressure firm enough to silence any flight instinct. My breath hitched. The primal response flared, that terrifying, unwanted desire to lean into the warmth, to seek the safety of his strength. A betrayal of my deepest convictions. "You ran because you were afraid of the mark," Elias stated, his thumb gently stroking the sensitive skin behind my ear. His scent intensified, thick and rich, deliberately targeting the parts of my brain dedicated to submission and mating. This was the moment of ultimate conflict, the confrontation of primal instinct versus my fiercely held autonomy. "You thought denying the bond would grant you autonomy. It only granted you loneliness." His words cut deeper than any physical threat. The perpetual, chilling loneliness of the last 7 years was the price I paid for my chosen freedom. Was he right? Had the independence I craved simply been a prolonged, cold isolation? "Loneliness is a small price for not being owned," I whispered, forcing myself to stand perfectly straight, rejecting the urge to submit to the comforting weight of his hand. His eyes darkened, shifting from calculating amusement to an intensity that promised irreversible change. He lowered his head, his lips grazing the spot he had just stroked, the prime location for the mark, the ultimate symbol of the claim I had vowed never to wear. "I don't want to simply own you, little Omega. I want to claim you." His breath was hot against my skin. "I want to anchor you to me so deeply that even the thought of running causes you physical pain." The proximity of his mouth, the overwhelming scent, the biological certainty of what was about to happen. It triggered a frantic surge of adrenaline. This was the moment I had spent 7 years preparing for. I reacted instinctively, violently. I brought my knee up hard, connecting with the vulnerable muscle of his thigh. It was a desperate, amateur move, but effective enough to break his concentration for a fraction of a second. Elias recoiled just enough for me to twist out from under his hand. I scrambled backward, putting distance between us, my chest heaving. The primal fog was momentarily shattered by the shock of my action. His eyes narrowed, not in pain, but in stunned realization that I had dared to strike him. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips, acknowledging the unexpected resilience of his prey. "Fierce," he praised. sounding genuinely impressed. "That fire is exactly what I missed, Madison. I will never wear your mark," I spat, my voice shaking with unresolved panic and newly resurrected defiance. "You can hold me here, but you cannot make me submit. Not in 7 years, and not now." He took a single deliberate step toward me, closing the distance I had fought to create. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. He was the center of this orbit, and I was perpetually trapped within his gravity. "We shall see, little Omega," Elias Thorne responded, his dominance filling the air like a physical entity. He paused, his gaze sweeping over my face, lingering on my trembling lips. He didn't pursue the irrevocable claim further in that instant. He simply let the tension coil tighter, leaving me breathless in the opulent prison he had created. He knew the fight had just begun, and he clearly intended to savor every minute of the unfolding war between my stubborn independence and the biological destiny he represented. He walked towards a heavy, soundproofed side door that I hadn't noticed, an entry to what must be his private study or quarters. "Rest, Madison," he commanded, the words softer now, yet carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You've had a long flight, but understand this, the runway is closed. You are home." The door clicked shut, leaving me entirely alone in the suffocating luxury of the Thorne estate. I sank onto the plush carpet, dragging ragged breaths into my lungs. The adrenaline crash was immediate, leaving me hollowed out and aching. 7 years of successful concealment, dissolved in a whisper and a possessive touch. The scent of him remained, heavy and inescapable. I had lost the initial battle for avoidance, but the fierce war for my body and my spirit, the resistance to the mark, was far from over. I closed my eyes, visualizing the sharp, dominant features of the alpha who intended to permanently cage me, stealing my resolve. The battle shifts now, from running to surviving. I would survive this, mark or no mark. The relentless pursuit was just beginning, and my determination to protect my autonomy burned fiercely against the primal desire to submit, ensuring the conflict would be long and brutal. I would meet his pursuit with every ounce of vigilance I had left. The heavy silence of the Thorne estate was more imposing than the roar of the Union Station concourse. There was no background noise here, no oblivious crowd to hide in, just the meticulous quiet of profound wealth and isolation. I finally pushed myself up from the thick rug, my limbs stiff and heavy. The air, devoid of the neutralizing chemicals of my scent suppressants, felt alive, vibrating with the residual warmth of Elias Alpha's signature. I moved to the nearest window, a wall of seamless glass overlooking manicured terraces that dropped away into untouched forest. The view wasn't a comfort. It was a map of my imprisonment, too high to jump, too far from any road to run. This place was designed for security, built to ensure that once claimed, nothing could deviate from its intended orbit. My utilitarian clothing, my armor of anonymity, felt thin and cheap against the opulent backdrop. I pulled the sleeves down, trying to cover the skin that still tingled from the brief, proprietary clasp of his hand. 7 years, a constant, exhausting battle against biology, against fate, against him, and it took less than 7 minutes for that fortress to crumble. The memory of his breath against my ear, the sheer intoxicating dominance of his scent, cedar, cold stone, power, sent a sickening wave of heat through me. I pressed my palms hard against my temples, willing the biological betrayal to cease. My Omega designation, typically a faint whisper under the careful dosage of suppressants, was now a loud, anxious hum, desperately seeking the equilibrium only an alpha presence could provide. My body was screaming for the very thing my mind vehemently rejected: submission. I began to methodically inspect the room, not for escape, but for reassurance. The ensuite was marble and chrome, sealed tight. The closet was vast and empty. The heavy side door Elias had used to exit was solid wood, clearly keyed or locked from the outside. There were no vents large enough, no loose floorboards, no weakness. This was a fortress within a fortress, and I was its only intensely desired prisoner. A wave of exhaustion finally hit, the accumulation of 7 years of heightened vigilance crashing down. I hadn't slept truly soundly since I initiated the self-imposed exile. Every noise, every approaching footstep, every change in air current had been interpreted as a potential threat. Now, the threat was fully materialized, and ironically, in its immediate presence, the need for perpetual watchfulness seemed redundant. Where could I run to? I slumped onto the edge of the massive, custom-made bed. The sheets were impossibly soft, woven from high-count material, and saturated with the faint, deep scent of Elias. It was a calculated move, I realized, designed to lull the biological instinct into compliance. If I slept here, the scent transference would begin, slowly acclimating my system to his dominance, weakening my resolve before the next confrontation. I stood up immediately, choosing instead to perch rigidly on the velvet chaise lounge, avoiding the bed's dangerous comfort. Hours passed in this agonizing stillness. The setting sun cast long, judging shadows across the room. I didn't know what he was doing. Negotiating business? Planning my fate? The calculating nature Elias possessed was perhaps more terrifying than raw aggression. He wasn't pursuing me in a rage. He was acquiring an asset, patiently waiting for the optimal moment to finalize the irrevocable claim attempt. Just as the last light faded, replaced by the soft glow of automated interior lighting, the heavy side door clicked open. I didn't jump. I merely stiffened, the thin thread of my defiance coiling taut. Elias walked in, not in a suit of business dominance, but casually dressed in dark trousers and a simple, high-quality knit shirt that stretched tautly over his powerful shoulders. He carried a small silver tray containing a glass of water and a plain, small ceramic bowl. "I imagine you haven't eaten properly today," he stated, his voice devoid of the mocking edge he'd used earlier. It was a simple, pragmatic statement, emphasizing his awareness of my basic needs, a subtle way of underlining his control. "I'm not hungry," I replied, my voice raspy. He ignored my refusal, setting the tray down on a low table near the chaise lounge. "It's soup, plain. Nothing you could accuse me of slipping sedatives into. Although if I wanted you subdued, Madison, I assure you, I would use far more effective methods." His honesty was disarming, designed to break the cycle of paranoia that had sustained me for 7 years. I glared at him, refusing to let down my guard. "You really expect me to sit here and enjoy a meal with my captor?" Elias settled into an armchair opposite the chaise, mirroring my posture but radiating an ease that showcased the fundamental difference in our power. "I expect you to maintain your strength. The flight is over, little Omega, but the real work, the bonding, is about to begin. You'll need your energy for that." His directness was staggering. He wasn't hiding his intentions or masking the nature of my captivity. He intended to proceed with the marking, and he saw my resistance as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. "I told you," I reiterated, my voice trembling slightly, "I will never wear your mark." He lifted a single expressive brow, his scrutinizing gray eyes locked onto mine, calm and predatory. "That is your mind speaking, and your mind, for all its fierce independence, is currently fighting a war it is biologically engineered to lose." He leaned forward slightly. The alpha scent, which had been a low simmer since his arrival, intensified. It was a deliberate, controlled release, a calculated pheromonal assault. The scent went straight to the core of my primal instincts, bypassing conscious thought. My blood warmed instantly, a heavy, liquid sensation pooling in my abdomen. My hands clenched into fists, fighting the urge to relax my shoulders, to let the tension go, to let him take the weight. The primal instinct wasn't just desire. It was a deeply ingrained need for safety and structure, for the alpha's dominance to counteract the dangerous volatility of the Omega designation. "You've been suppressing your truth for too long, Madison," he murmured, his voice softer, more intimate, aimed directly at the yielding core of my Omega identity. "Tell me honestly, when was the last time you felt truly safe? Not just hidden, but truly secure, anchored?" The question was a precise, cruel strike. The chilling loneliness of my exile flashed through my mind, the quick glances over my shoulder, the constant fear of being scented, the perpetual coldness of living chemically sterile. That was the price of my autonomy. I was free, I choked out, despite the undeniable truth that freedom had felt a lot like fear. "Freedom at the cost of your nature is not freedom. It is isolation," Elias countered, rising from the armchair. He moved to stand directly over me, forcing me to look up into the deep, commanding gray of his eyes. He didn't touch me, but the sheer proximity of his power was overwhelming. The air felt thick, electrified. My heart slammed against my ribs, a desperate, rapid drumbeat of pure biological response. His scent was crushing now, a tidal wave of cedar and stone, an absolute display of dominance intended to drive the Omega response to its peak. My eyes fluttered shut involuntarily. I could feel the pheromones working, a seductive warmth spreading through my body, dulling the sharpness of my defiant thoughts, urging the involuntary shift toward submission. I felt the dangerous, intoxicating urge to drop my head, to expose my neck, to offer the sight of the mark. No, the silent scream of my conscious mind was barely audible against the roar of the primal need. 7 years of sacrifice could not end in this soft, biological surrender. "Look at me, Madison," Elias commanded, the words slicing through the fog. I forced my eyes open. His expression was intense, possessive, but there was a flicker of something deeper, a satisfaction in watching the raw, unsuppressed fight happening within me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It wasn't the mark, not yet. It was a length of exquisitely crafted, heavy silver chain, looped into a simple, elegant bracelet. He placed it deliberately on the table between us. "This is a gift," he stated. "Wear it or don't. But know this, I am not waiting 7 more years. You are mine. The mark is an inevitability, little Omega. The only question is how much more pain you intend to inflict upon yourself before you accept the safety and certainty I offer. The silver chain was a symbol, an echo of the chains of ownership I had feared. The metaphorical marking collar brought into physical manifestation. I shoved myself backward off the chaise lounge, putting a few frantic steps between us, rejecting the proximity and the heavy silver link. My defiance, fueled by sheer desperate adrenaline, won out over the biological pull. I was shaking, tears of frustration and fear blurring my vision, but I was standing. You can surround me with walls, Elias, and you can flood this room with your scent until I can barely think, I declared, my voice hoarse but steady. But that chain, that mark, you will have to take it by force. I will fight you until the day I die. I will never willingly submit to being anchored to you. A genuine, slow smile spread across his face, not one of amusement, but of deep, satisfied anticipation. He didn't look angry or disappointed by my renewed resistance. He looked like a hunter who had just confirmed the vitality of his prey. Then the hunt truly begins, he agreed, his eyes shining with cold intensity. He walked past the table, pausing only to pick up the silver bracelet and pocket it again. I prefer my Omega Resilient, Madison. It will make the eventual claim all the more satisfying. He stepped back toward the heavy side door. This time, he didn't command me to rest. He simply left me standing in the center of the opulent room, trembling, battling the receding waves of primal instinct, yet fortified by a fresh infusion of purpose. The war had shifted entirely. No longer was I fighting to run. I was fighting to survive within his orbit, determined to protect the autonomy I had dedicated my entire adult life to securing. He might have captured the body, but my spirit remained fiercely autonomous. The pursuit of the permanent mark would be relentless, but my resistance, honed by 7 years of exile, was ready to meet it. He wanted to claim me irrevocably, but I would ensure the cost was higher than he ever anticipated. I would meet his pursuit with every ounce of vigilance I had left. I sank back onto the edge of the chaise, tasting the ash of the forced surrender on my tongue, and started planning my next move. Submission was not an option. Not now, not ever. The war for the mark was on. The silence after Elias left was louder than his presence. It was the ringing silence of a chamber meticulously crafted for one purpose: containment. I remained fixed on the chaise, my body rigid, trying to neutralize the residual shock of his pheromonal assault. The scent of him, cedar, cold stone, power, still clung to the velvet, urging my muscles to relax, urging my mind to give in. I needed my scent suppressants. Without them, I was exposed, operating under a constant, debilitating biological disadvantage. My own omega hormones were spiking in response to the unchallenged alpha signature surrounding me, cycling between panicked anxiety and a dangerous, yielding heat. I stood, moving swiftly to the ensuite, tearing open drawers and cabinets, searching for the small, innocuous vials or the thin, skin-colored patches. Nothing, of course. Elias would have confiscated them immediately. He wanted me functioning at full biological capacity, vulnerable and reactive, making my reasoned defiance 1,000 times harder to maintain. He wanted the raw fight of the Omega, not the chemically masked autonomy of Madison Hayes. I slammed a drawer shut, the sound echoing harshly in the marble space. This was the true nature of his strategy. He wasn't relying on physical force yet. He was using biology as his primary weapon, confident that 7 years of vigilance would crumble under the weight of suppressed instinct. I returned to the main room, pacing the length of the thick rug. I had to focus on the immediate, tangible reality. I was physically fine, but psychologically under siege. I had survived 7 years on meticulous planning and chemical control. Now, I was left only with the planning. I forced myself to stop pacing and analyze the environment again, but this time, I wasn't looking for a broken lock. I was looking for information. Elias hadn't just found me at Union Station Concourse. He had been hunting me. The casual certainty of his movements suggested he knew more than just my current location. As if summoned by my scrutiny, the heavy door clicked again. I didn't flinch this time. My initial surprise had been replaced by a hardened layer of weary anticipation. Elias re-entered, carrying not a tray, but a sleek, leather-bound folder. He didn't approach the chaise lounge. Instead, he placed the folder on a large, polished writing desk near the window, opening it with a deliberate, slow movement that drew my attention instantly. "You've had a remarkably consistent pattern over the years, Madison," he commented, his back mostly to me as he scanned the contents. His voice was calm, conversational, a terrifying contrast to the dominance he had wielded moments before. Every 9 months, a move, always within a manageable distance, never crossing major geographical barriers, always changing the hair color, but never the practical nature of the clothing. He paused, lifting a single, Laminated card from the folder. Clara Nevin, he read aloud, his tone laced with dark amusement. A surprisingly drab choice of names. Less flamboyant than Eleanor Finch, certainly. That was your identity near the Crimson Heights apartments, wasn't it? The one you maintained for 18 months. A lifetime for you, relatively. My stomach dropped. He hadn't just tracked my scent. He had infiltrated the labyrinth of my identities. He held the culmination of my 7 years of sacrifice in his hands, reducing my painstaking vigilance to a file he could casually review. How long? I whispered, the shame of being so thoroughly uncovered burning on my skin. He finally turned, leaning back against the edge of the desk. His gaze was intense, dissecting. How long did it take me to find you? The moment you initiated the self-imposed exile. You were flagged, Madison. The moment you started running from your designation. You became an object of interest. You were never truly invisible, just difficult to locate definitively. He tossed a handful of false identification documents onto the desk. They fanned out. Laminated cards, residency permits, professional licenses, a dizzying array of carefully constructed lies, all rendered useless by the man standing before me. I let you run, Elias stated, folding his arms across his massive chest. I needed you to exhaust the running instinct. I needed you to believe you had built a fortress of anonymity, so that when I finally stepped through the door, the impact would be devastating. 7 years of successful concealment, a beautiful delusion. The cold calculation in his voice was shattering. My flight had not been a series of victories. It had been a controlled experiment, a slow-burn psychological tactic orchestrated by the alpha who desired the challenge. You played with me, I accused, my voice raw with disbelief and rage. I educated you, he corrected smoothly. I taught you that autonomy at the expense of instinct leads only to chilling loneliness and exhaustion. Now, the lesson is over, and the payment is due. He pushed off the desk, moving into the center of the room. The distance he maintained was strategic, preventing me from retreating further, yet not close enough to trigger an immediate physical confrontation. We will begin the bonding process tomorrow, Elias declared, his voice firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Today, you will accept this reality. You will eat, you will rest, and you will understand that your resistance is futile. The moment I mark you, Madison, every single lie you've lived will dissolve. You will finally be anchored, safe, and truly yours. The last word, yours, resonated with a possessiveness that was profoundly contradictory. He claimed ownership while promising self-possession. It was the Omega paradox. Surrender to the alpha provides the deepest security for the self. My mental defenses, already brittle from the loss of the suppressants and the revelation of his surveillance, began to give way under the sheer weight of his alpha certainty. The exhaustion returned tenfold. If he had known all along, if every struggle had been monitored, what was the point of fighting now? This is the trap, my conscious mind screamed, a fading voice in the rising tide of instinct. He is dismantling your will piece by piece. I forced myself to meet his eyes. You believe that because you've tracked my documents, you've captured my spirit? I believe that because I have tracked your documents, I have removed the mechanism of your escape, Elias countered, taking one slow, deliberate step closer. And I believe that my scent, which you are struggling desperately to ignore right now, is doing the rest of the work for me. He took a final heavy step, closing the distance to just a few feet. The intensity of his presence was no longer merely pheromonal, it was physical, a palpable pressure on the air. He leaned down slightly, utilizing his height and power to exert absolute dominance. The Omega in me shattered. The mental control I had fought so hard to maintain evaporated under the scorching heat of his focused power. My hands flew instinctively to the sides of my neck, not in a defensive gesture, but in a desperate, involuntary shielding of the vulnerable scent glands, a gesture of self-preservation that immediately flipped into the instinctual counteraction, presentation. My knees buckled. I didn't fall completely, but I slumped, my head dropping forward, exposing the delicate juncture of my throat and shoulder, the site of the permanent mark. It was a primal, gut-wrenching betrayal. 7 years of rejecting the mark, and in one focused instant of alpha dominance, my body offered it willingly. A shudder ran through me, a mixture of shame, fear, and a terrifying, overwhelming sense of relief. Relief that the fight could finally end, that the weight of constant vigilance could be transferred to his massive shoulders. Elias did not touch me. He simply watched the raw, involuntary submission play out. His breath was warm on the top of my lowered head. The air around him shimmered with triumphant, cold satisfaction. There she is, he murmured, his voice a deep, vibrating rumble that smoothed the chaotic anxiety in my chest. The little Omega who finally admits her truth. He waited, letting the submission sink in, allowing my system to register the potent, undeniable sensation of being completely sheltered, completely dominated, completely safe. It was intoxicating, lethal. For a split second, I nearly wept with the biological desire to remain anchored in that pose, to simply submit to the inevitability of the claim. But the shame of the betrayal was a sharp, cold shock of water. The years of sacrifice, the isolation, the sheer grit required to maintain Clara Nevin and Eleanor Finch. It roared back, extinguishing the primal heat. I clenched my jaw, tasting blood where I had bitten down on my tongue. With a massive, agonizing effort that felt like tearing my own muscles, I forced my head back up. My gaze, though still clouded with the residue of instinct, was fiercely defiant. "You might trick my body," I gasped, clutching my throat to suppress another involuntary tremor. "But you haven't broken my mind, Elias." I stumbled backward, putting distance between us. The sight of his triumphant expression solidified my renewed resolve. He had won the battle of pheromones, but the war was still mine to fight. "You are relentless," he observed, not as a compliment, but as an assessment of the challenge. "And you are predictable," I retorted, finding a sudden, unexpected calm in my exhaustion. "You confuse capture with ownership. You have secured my physical location, but you haven't secured my compliance. You rely on instinct, but I have 7 years of practice overriding it." I looked toward the desk, at the scattered documents representing my abandoned lives. I had lost the fight to run, but the fight against the mark, the irreversible claim, was still within my power. "I need access to the suite's internal environmental controls," I stated, the demand sounding ludicrously domestic given the circumstance. "The air is saturated with your signature. If you intend for me to survive to your desired bonding date, you will need to allow me a neutral space to manage the physiological stress." It was a test, a necessary establishment of boundaries no matter how small. He could continue the pheromonal assault, but it would physically break me long before the bonding. Elias studied me, his gray eyes narrowed, weighing the validity of the demand. He saw the genuine physiological distress, the trembling in my hands, the rapid, shallow breaths. He needed me healthy for the mark. A slow, proprietary smile returned, tinged with respect for my audacity. "A fair point, little Omega," he conceded. "I will adjust the filtration system. But know this, even clean air won't wash my scent from your subconscious. You are already acclimated, Madison. You just refuse to admit how much safer you feel here than you ever did alone." He didn't move to adjust the controls himself. Instead, he pulled a small, sleek communication device from his pocket and issued a low, concise instruction to someone outside the room. The hum of the environmental system intensified almost immediately, a subtle shift in the air pressure confirming the change. The heavy, stifling presence of his scent began to recede, very slowly, replaced by a neutral, sterile current. It wasn't enough to negate him, but it was enough to breathe, enough to think. I had extracted a concession, a small victory of strategy over instinct. I sank back onto the chaise, keeping my posture upright, vigilant. He remained standing, observing me, the possessive intensity in his gaze unwavering. "Rest, Madison," he commanded softly. "You'll need your strength. The war for the mark is about to truly begin, and I intend for it to be utterly magnificent." He turned and left the room, the heavy side door locking with a definitive, mechanical click. I didn't move until the sound had completely faded. The air was clearing, but the truth was not. Elias was right. The physiological safety his presence offered was a dangerous, seductive drug. But I looked down at my hands, remembering the desperate, involuntary movement of submission. That momentary betrayal cemented my resolve more firmly than 7 years of fear ever could. I had lost the flight, but I would never lose the war for my neck. I would fight the scent, the instincts, and the overwhelming power of Elias Thorne until I drew my last breath. The mark was inevitable only if I ceased to fight, and I was just getting started. I closed my eyes, cataloging the layout of the room, preparing for tomorrow's inevitable confrontation. The hunt was on, and I would prove to him that even a captured Omega could be the fiercest prey. Thumbs up the screen and join the squad. Subscribe now.